Welcome back, everyone. In tonight's video, we'll look at the scary side of the nursing profession. Nurses frequently witness things no one else does, standing between life and death every day. But they also face incomprehensible phenomena that transcend medicine and science. These are true anecdotes from nurses who encountered the supernatural in hospital rooms during late-night shifts and in patients' final moments. So sit back and prepare to hear some terrifying stories from folks who have observed things they will never forget. Let us begin. Story number 1. I work in the labor and delivery department on the 3rd floor of the hospital, and the ICU is just below us on the 2nd floor. One day, a 47-year-old woman called Joanne came in, pregnant. She seemed gloomy and never smiled. When I inquired about her name, she did not immediately respond. After approximately 4 times of asking, she eventually responded, Joanne. Joanne preferred to sleep in her chair rather than lying in bed. She had black bags under her eyes that indicated she hadn't slept in a long time. I was worried about her and her baby and hoped everything was fine with them. When I looked into Joanne's past, it revealed that she had a history of paranoia, melancholy, and hallucinations. It's no surprise that she appeared to be in emotional distress. I informed her that I'd be back with a needle to start in 4 in her arm. She questioned what the 4 was for, and I replied that it was to administer medicine directly into her vein. She nodded and said okay. When I returned, Joanne was asleep in her chair. I gently awakened her and informed her that I required her arm to start the 4. She handed me her left arm and lowered her head, her hair concealing her face. As I was placing the 4, she said, "The hospital is a gateway between life and death. Below us is the intensive care unit, where people die. Here, people give birth to fresh life." Her remarks caused goosebumps in me for some reason. After I finished the 4, she glanced up and asked, "If it came down to it, who would you save, me or my baby?" I was taken aback and questioned her why she was asking such a question. She went on to say more. "Beach, would you save me or my baby if you had to choose between the 2? Joan's conduct seemed disturbing, as if she were either high or possessed. I told her I was uncomfortable answering that question. She stood up, looked straight at me, and said, "You must choose. The decision is yours to make today. So, who will you select to survive, and who will die?" She was behaving intimidatingly, and I was irritated that she had insulted me so much. Without thinking, I told her I'd go with the baby. Joanne chuckled, pointed to herself, and added, "You chose the baby, so this woman will die shaken." I exited the room and reported the event to my manager. My supervisor went into Joanne's room to talk to her, and after a while, he came out shaking his head. "Joanne is not doing well," he said. At 6 p.m., the doctor arrived, and we escorted Joanne to the delivery room. She successfully gave birth to a healthy baby girl, but for some unknown reason, she began bleeding profusely afterward. They hurried her to surgery, after which she was transferred to the ICU. Later that night, she passed away in the intensive care unit. Her blood and urine tests came back clear. She wasn't using drugs, and she appeared to be a clean, stable person, which made me wonder if she was actually mentally ill or if something had possessed her. I could not forget what she said, "Because you picked the baby, this woman will die." I kept wondering who she was referring to as this woman. Was she speaking about herself? It was one of the most unusual situations I've ever had as a nurse. Sometimes we receive patients who say that someone or something is chasing them and attempting to murder them. When people say things like that, they don't sleep well. Many people believe they are suffering from mental illness, but in Joanne's case, I wonder if she was possessed by something. Story number 2. I work at an old nursing home. This structure was originally built to house tuberculosis sufferers. Several people died here during that time. Later, the building was turned into a children's hospital. Nowadays, it is a shelter for the sick and aged. In this building, both patients and staff frequently report hearing or seeing small children at night, especially when most of the lights are turned off so that patients can sleep. After 13 years of working here, I've seen something strange. Between December and January, the staff reports that they rarely see or hear the young children in the building, but when we don't see or hear the youngsters, it appears to be a terrible indicator. For whatever reason, the majority of our patient deaths occur around this time of year. The statement, When they go in threes, is always accurate. In January, a male was admitted to our facility. I was working the night shift at the time, and I heard no children giggling. It was disturbingly silent. This man came in for physical rehabilitation after knee surgery and was assigned room 7. Throughout his 4-day stay, he complained every night of a tall, slender girl with long fingernails who kept pinching him. He requested to change rooms, but all of the rooms were occupied. We had nowhere else for him to go. At night, he insisted on leaving the door open, the corridor light on, and even the light in his room on. Despite this, he complained about a dark, tall girl who pinched him with her long fingers. On the 4th night, he was unusually calm. There were no complaints. From midnight, my CNA went to check on him and discovered him lying in bed, eyes wide open and foaming from the lips. We phoned an ambulance, and another nurse and I went into his room to help him and administer oxygen. We saw nickel-sized marks all over his body, like if someone had pinched him. When the ambulance arrived, they transported him to the hospital. They discovered bits of the man's own skin beneath his fingernails. It turned out he'd been clawing and pinching himself. Later, an inquiry was undertaken at our facility for probable abuse. After 4 weeks in the hospital, he died from various health difficulties. Sometimes I wonder why the absence of children or the sound of their laughter at night appears to portend more fatalities in our facility. I'm curious if the youngsters are hiding from anything or anyone else at this moment. Sinister story number 3. In 1994, I worked as a home health nurse. My patients were primarily of Hmong ethnicity at the time because many Hmong families were still adjusting to American life. Thus, my manager usually assigned me to Hmong patients, and Hmong families frequently requested a Hmong nurse due to language barriers. I recall one family I visited because their grandmother was ill and had a wound on her buttock. She was paralyzed from the waist down due to a stroke 2 years ago. She could not move her leg and spent much of her time in a wheelchair or bed. When I arrived, I saw 2 straw figures hanging on their door. These straw figurines are generally used to ward off evil spirits. I banged on the door a few times and then heard the grandma say, "Who is it?" I explained that I was there as a nurse to check on her wound and administer medication. After that, she opened the door and asked me inside. She took a while to reach the door because she was in a wheelchair. I inquired whether she was home alone, and she answered yes. Her son and daughter-in-law were at work, and the kids were in school, so she was alone. This was the first time I met her. She was really thin, just skin and bones, and both her wrists were wrapped in holy crimson cords. Again, these strings were utilized to ward off spirits. I wondered about her condition. I explained that I was there to treat her wound and administer medication and requested that she lie down on the bed so I could examine it. We proceeded to her bedroom, and she sat on the bed before pulling off her jeans. She assured me that her late husband had died in Southeast Asia, and that even after his death, he had followed them to America. She stated that after his death, he transformed into a tiger spirit and attempted to take her with him, which is why she developed a tail. She cautioned me not to be afraid if she revealed her tiger tail to me. I assured her that I was not terrified and only wanted to inspect the wound on her bottom so that I could treat it. She lay down and removed her trousers and underwear, facing the wall so I could see her back. The wound on her bottom was the result of extended sitting and lying down. Her skin was deteriorating, and the odor was intense. I saw her tailbone protruding. I understood this had to be what she meant by sprouting a tail. It wasn't a real tail, but rather her exposed tailbone, which everyone possesses. I cleansed and packed the wound with gauze before covering it with a dressing. She put her pants back on, and I assisted her into her wheelchair. I gave her pain medicine and antibiotics, and then I explained that, while she may not be aware of it, all humans have a tailbone, and when people lie in bed for too long, the skin on their bottom can deteriorate, exposing the tailbone. The grandma nodded, but as soon as I finished speaking, we both heard heavy footsteps in the attic, like if someone was moving around up there. I peered up, unsure of what was creating the noise, but it seemed like someone heavy moving above us. She tapped my wrist and said, "You can hear it, but please stay quiet." When my family is not present, my husband disguises himself as a tiger and takes up residence in the attic. I hear him every day when I am at home alone. But if you can hear him, pretend you can't. When she stated that, I lost all of my medical expertise and heard those heavy footfalls in the attic. I didn't want to leave her alone, but my duty was done, and I needed to see my next patient. The grandmother told me that she was not afraid to be home alone, and that it was only her husband who was up in the attic. She told me that in every place they had lived in, they would hear heavy footsteps in the attic, as heavy as a tiger's. She urged me not to worry and to go do my job. I thanked her and departed. I saw that grandmother every week for 4 months till she died. It was one of the most unusual encounters of my nursing career. Story number 4. I've been a nurse for a long time and have become numb to death. I am aware that when I return home, I am not permitted to bring my employment with me. Whatever happens at work remains at work. When I was a fresher nurse, I used to feel horrible for people. I used to sympathize with some of my patients even when they made poor decisions, but over time, I've grown indifferent to individuals who make terrible life choices and die as a result. I do not feel anything. As I already stated, I have become numb to death. One night, I was assigned to a 28-year-old patient named Sam. Sam had been abusing booze and drugs for the previous 2 years. He drank every day, lost his wife and children, and ultimately lost his job. Sam currently lives with his father. Without him, he would be homeless. Sam was in the ICU with liver, heart, and renal failure. When your liver and kidneys fail, toxins build up in your blood, and you are unable to urinate, causing fluids to collect in your body. In these circumstances, dialysis is necessary. That night, Sam was my lone patient, and I needed to dialyze him. We put him on a gradual dialysis termed continuous renal replacement treatment. He appeared normal lying in bed, watching TV while I worked at his bedside. Because he was my sole patient, we had time to talk. Sam informed me about his life, including how much he missed his wife and children. Unfortunately, he was abusing alcohol and drugs, so his wife took his children away after the divorce at 11 p.m. Sam fell asleep. His father came to see him after work before leaving home, but Sam was already asleep. Sam's father and I strolled outside and spoke for approximately 5 minutes. Sam's father informed me that Sam had been unable to stop drinking since his friend died. Sam had previously worked as a police officer, and one day he requested his friend to exchange shifts with him. His pal agreed, and they traded days. Unfortunately, on that day, Sam's companion was slain in the line of duty. Sam became filled with remorse and began drinking on a daily basis after that. Sam's wife and children eventually left him, and he refused to seek help, instead opting to drink himself to death. This is what Sam's father told me. I was Sam's nurse for 3 nights. We talked a lot, and I came to know him like a friend, but on the 3rd night, Sam's condition deteriorated, and he died while I was administering dialysis at 3 a.m. My CNA and I cleaned him up and prepared his body for the morgue after he was transported. I no longer had any patients, so I was permitted to return home. As I drove home, I couldn't stop thinking about Sam. I knew I wasn't supposed to carry my work home, but it seemed like I was. I knew my wife and child were both sleeping, but I didn't want to return home to this. I felt sorry, and tears welled up in my eyes. I pulled off along the side of the road near a canal. I decided to take out my fishing rod and fish for a while to clear my mind before returning home to see my family. I didn't want to bring any sadness into our home. I went to the trunk, got out my fishing rod and some carp and trout bait, baited my hook, and cast into the canal, then sat down to watch the water and wait for a bite. After about 20 minutes with no bites, I was relieved to be there at 4 a.m. enjoying the peace and quiet. A cop car came up behind me, and out stepped a young officer who introduced himself as Officer Paul. He inquired whether I was all right and if I needed any assistance. I assured him I was okay and just needed a bit of calm before heading home to my family. We talked a little, and he revealed that his grandfather was one of the men who helped build the canal for the farmers back in the day. He even said the canal was full of terrible fish and that I should come back with crappie bait the next time. After we talked for a time, he told me to be careful and thanked me for looking after the sick and injured officer. Paul shook my hand and returned to his car. I watched him go back, but when I looked again, there was no car behind me. I didn't see him switch on his lights or drive away. He and his car appear to have departed without a trace. I wasn't depressed anymore. I was creeped out. I packed and drove home to get some rest before my next shift. The next night, I returned to work at 11 a.m. I received a call from Sam's father. He'd just gotten off work. He asked if I could grab Sam's laptop from the room where he died. I went into the room, searched the closet, and discovered Sam's backpack with the laptop inside. When Sam's father arrived, I handed him his backpack. He appeared to have just cried, and I expressed my condolences. He rubbed my shoulder and expressed gratitude for taking such wonderful care of his son. Then I asked him the name of Sam's friend who had died. Sam's father explained that his friend's name was Paul, Officer Paul. I felt shivers go down my spine. Sam's father thanked me once more before leaving. Story number 5. I'm not sure why, but ever since my brother Che moved in with my mother and me, she wanted him included in our life insurance policy as well. It was incredibly pricey. Che is 38 years old, divorced, sad, obese, with high blood pressure and diabetes. Because of his medical difficulties, adding him to our life insurance coverage cost us more money. Things would be much better if Che helped out and got a job, but he doesn't. Instead, he sits in his room and plays video games. He also consumes beer, which contributes to his diabetes and high blood pressure. Then came 2020. I worked at a hospital and noticed that persons who died from the virus were generally obese, diabetic, or had high blood pressure. My oldest brother, Chile, was in jeopardy. I felt compelled to protect him from the infection. I must do everything I can to avoid contracting the illness and infecting my family. After nearly a year, some of my nurse colleagues contracted the infection. These were persons in good form who just had minor symptoms like coughing. Symptoms include a runny nose, headache, and slight fever. I was quite careful and avoided getting it. Every day, I'd return home to find my mother cleaning the house after a long day at work. I'd drink a Coke and then dump the can in the recycle bin, only to discover that it was full of beer bottles. I couldn't understand why I worked so hard to pay for everything, while Che drank himself into poor health despite all of my nursing precautions. I eventually contracted the virus. I believe it was unavoidable, given that I am regularly exposed to folks infected with the virus. My manager informed me that because I tested positive, I would need to stay at home for 2 weeks. My coworkers told me not to socialize if I had a fever, since I would be most contagious then. When I am not working, I stay in my room, which has its own refrigerator and bathroom. I did not want to make my mother or brother sick. However, one night I couldn't sleep since I had a fever and coughed. It is possible to sleep. Possible to sleep. It was 2 a.m., and I was wondering if Che was still playing games online. I left my room, took 2 beer bottles, and walked to Che's room. He was still awake. I sat on his bed, gave him a beer, and we began conversing while playing Street Fighter online. It was enjoyable, but I could not stop coughing. After approximately 2 hours, I took some Benadryl, fell asleep, and informed him that I was returning to my room to relax. After 4 days, Che began coughing so severely that even cleaning his teeth made it difficult for him to breathe. So we took him to the hospital. It's been 2 years, and my mother and I have been getting by on the extra $180,000 from the life insurance. I miss Che, even though he was my only older brother. My sisters and I adored him, but Dad passed away in 2023 as a result of the epidemic. I was at a friend's New Year's party and had a few drinks. My pals and I celebrated at midnight, each downing a beer around 2 a.m. People began leaving. The friend hosting the party told everyone to remain till morning, but I was just slightly intoxicated and wanted to go home because everyone else was going. At the time, I assumed it was safe to drive home. As I turned into the highway ramp instead of following the traffic, I noticed the road twist into a loop. I followed the curve without realizing I was driving against incoming traffic. It was close to 3 a.m., so the highway was mostly empty, but a few cars passed me and flashed their high beams to indicate that I was heading the wrong way. They swerved to avoid me. I was drunk and didn't notice I was on the wrong side of the road until a blue car drove up alongside me, and the person inside had their inside light turned on. He would match my speed, smile at me, and then slow down before speeding up and catching up with me again, smiling each time. That's when I discovered Che was in the car. He slowed down again. When I snapped out of my fog, 2 trucks approached me quickly, one in the fast lane and the other in the slow lane, both honking at me. I swiftly turned to the left. My car drove up onto the rail track, and rocks flew everywhere. As I pressed the brakes firmly, I came to a halt, taking a deep breath as my heart raced. I backed down, turned around, and sat for a few moments, trying to understand what had just transpired. I was aware that I was driving drunk and that if arrested, I would face serious consequences, including the loss of my job. Following that, I drove home. Fortunately, it was New Year's Eve, and there were probably a lot of cops out patrolling, so I didn't get caught. When I came home, I collapsed onto the couch and slept. I didn't dream that night, but the next night I had one about Che. In the dream, he approached me and said he was going for good. He said that he was only there to make sure I was okay, reminding me that I was the youngest and that my mother would need me. I awoke crying. I'm not sure why, but I became extremely emotional, and guilt has been eating at me every day. That concludes this video. Thank you for watching and supporting my stories. Have a great day or night.